So, Chrysler and the rest of the business news with Joe Lynham now. Hello there, Joe.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, driven to bankruptcy. America's iconic car maker Chrysler is headed for Chapter 11 protection, but it'll merge with Fiat after it's been fully restructured. The defence giant BAE Systems is to cut 500 jobs in the UK. It says that Britain's withdrawal from Iraq has been bad for business. And once upon a time there were over 200 piano makers in this country. Today there's only one, and it's shutting the factory down. Now, after 84 years and having become a symbol of America, the car giant Chrysler has filed for bankruptcy protection. Talks with the company's creditors broke down irretrievably today in Detroit, and the Obama administration stepped in to force Chrysler into Chapter 11, which will see a judge decide the future of America's third largest car maker. From Detroit, here's the BBC's Caroline Hepker.
Flooding out of Chrysler's Warren assembly plant, workers know a lot more now than when they clocked in early this morning. Chrysler is going into Chapter 11 bankruptcy.
How worried are you about your job?
Very worried. Who isn't worried about their job?
But for some, the decision is a relief.
Well, no, see, it's not a question of good or bad. It's a question of knowing. That's all I wanted.
Employees have been told there will be at least temporary plant closures and a ripple effect through the industry. This man works for a Chrysler supplier.
We could go down as well, sure, but I hope not.
Chrysler, known for its big trucks, could get a shake-up from a partnership with Fiat.
They get more miles per gallon, they're efficient, and we need to have a better track record as far as that goes. As far as smaller cars, more miles per gallon, you know, and I think that's what the American public's looking for.
And that was Caroline Hepker there from a very rainy Detroit. Now, house prices are down again. More data out today from the Nationwide Building Society, and the Land Registry today confirmed the downward trend. House prices in the UK fell by 0.4% in April, reversing some of the rises seen in March, according to the Nationwide. The Building Society's figures show that the pace of decline in house prices slowed somewhat, though. But the typical home still costs 15% less than a year ago. The Land Registry says that house prices dropped by 0.4% during March, the lowest monthly fall in nearly a year, while the annual rate of decline eased from a record 16.6 to 16.2%. Well, the Nationwide's chief economist said that although prices had fallen, there was still optimism in the market.
Well, I think if we look at how far house prices have fallen, that makes everything much more affordable. And on top of that, we do have very low interest rates at the moment. So it's not surprising people who are curious about what's happening and what they can now afford that maybe they couldn't have done this time last year. So I think there are good reasons for why optimism has changed. But given, I say, uncertainty about the economic environment and particularly about jobs, it's not clear how quickly those will feed into real transactions and then give us the boost of demand to see prices beginning to increase again.
Now, on the day that the UK combat operations ended in Iraq, 500 jobs are to be lost at the defence giant BAE Systems, with cuts in its combat vehicles and weapons unit. Factories at Telford, Leeds and Guildford will close by the end of the year, and Newcastle and Barrow sites will also lose staff. BAE had previously announced it would cut 200 jobs in November. Earlier I spoke to David Yendall from the manufacturers' organisation, the EEF, and asked him whether the BAE story was typical.
Certainly a problem that many manufacturers are facing, and that's been reflected, I think, in the announcement we made today that pay settlements in manufacturing has fallen to a historically low level of 1.6% in the last 3 months. And that the number of companies freezing pay is at, again, an all-time low at very nearly 45% of companies. So very clear indication of the serious difficulties that companies are facing.
But how come you guys aren't benefiting from a cheap pound? I mean, the pound has lost nearly a third of its value against major basket of currencies. That should make exports a lot cheaper for you guys.
Well, it certainly does make exports a lot cheaper. The problem is that in many of the countries to which our manufacturers export, demand is at very low, and so it's not going to be a benefit until demand in these other countries starts to pick up.
Assuming demand does pick up in the next couple of years, UK productivity still lags behind most major competitors, France and Germany, for example, so you're not producing per man as much as those two countries, which makes you less efficient.
Well, the levels of productivity have improved quite significantly in in recent years. And it's one of the reasons why I think companies have been desperate to hang on to many of the skilled workers they've got. These days, it's very difficult to make small reductions in your workforce without having a significant impact on your business model.
Talking about skilled workers, do you expect many more kind of voluntary cuts in working time and hours and even pay that we've seen in the car industry being replicated throughout the industry, because that seems to have a major impact on homes and families throughout the country?
Well, we're certainly seeing in very many large numbers of our companies moves towards a greater use of short-time working. And I have to say, it's something that both employees and their representatives have responded very positively towards. We're disappointed, however, that the government hasn't recognised this and provided some additional financial assistance, particularly in those situations where companies are seeking to use those periods when people have got workless periods to retrain and upskill their workforce.
And sticking with UK manufacturing, once upon a time there were over 200 piano makers in the UK. Now there's only one, Kemble & Co. But their major backer, Yamaha, has decided the business is no longer viable, and come October, Kemble will be shutting its Milton Keynes factory with a loss of up to 90 jobs. Well, Brian Kemble's family has been making pianos for 3 generations. He told me that telling his staff of the closure was one of the most difficult things he's had to ever do.
It's been very tough for manufacturing. Obviously, with the exchange rate weakening in the last year, it's been it made it life easier for manufacturers. But we've had many years with very high exchange rates, and it's been way too tough for manufacturing.
Eurozone unemployment has crept higher as recession takes its toll. The latest stats from the EU show the jobless rate hit 8.9% in March, 0.2% higher than the previous month. 419,000 people were added to the unemployment roll, taking it to over 14.1 million people. Our Europe business reporter Mark Gregory makes sense of the numbers.
These figures are further evidence that Europe is suffering in the global downturn. Almost 9% of workers in the Eurozone were without a job in March, up from 7% at the same time last year. The rise in unemployment gives ammunition to those economists who believe Europe is in for a deeper and longer recession than other parts of the developed world. But there's huge variation between countries in the Eurozone. Unemployment is barely a problem in the Netherlands. Only 2.8% of Dutch workers were out of work. In Spain, which has the region's highest jobless tally, the figure was over 18%, nearly 1 in 5 of the workforce. Germany, Europe's economic powerhouse, has seen a hefty rise in unemployment. But its overall jobless tally was still a bit below the Eurozone average, at 7.6% of the workforce. The rise in youth unemployment is particularly worrying for policymakers in the Eurozone. In March, almost a fifth of under 25-year-olds were without a job. Youth-dominated riots in France and Greece, partly caused by lack of work, are still fresh in memory. But price rises aren't much of a problem. Inflation was running at an annual rate of just 0.6% in April, according to an early snapshot. Low inflation gives the European Central Bank more scope to cut borrowing costs when it meets in Frankfurt next week. Mark Gregory, BBC News, Brussels.
Oh, well, let's have a quick look at the markets before we go. A bit of a mixed picture on both sides of the Atlantic. We had some pretty good numbers in the UK. The FTSE up 1.3% at 42.43. Good numbers from William Hill and very good numbers from AstraZeneca, though later on in the day AstraZeneca shares fell off. On the American side of the Atlantic, finished off just a tiny bit, fractured down 17 points at 81.86. The market in the States pretty much shrugged off the fact that Chrysler, the third largest car maker, was headed for Chapter 11. That's because they pretty much expected it. So that's why it's pretty much flat trading on the Dow. Though the Nasdaq was up slightly, that's the tech-heavy Nasdaq on the United States. So a bit of a mixed picture overall on both sides of the Atlantic, and that is the business news for now. More, of course, on the website should you wish to have some.
I was just looking at the FT, actually, which leads on the FTSE, which we'll look at in just a moment, Joe. I was checking your figures there, actually. Thanks very much.
Doubting my figures, Chris.
I was a little bit, actually, yeah. As the FT's talking about a bull run, so we'll